So today I wanted to take some time and talk through Muddling with you. This is a longer story, so I have decided to clump this into four basic sections of what we learn in each of those sections to break this story down a bit. So we open up first with our first section of the story. It says a guy on the local news said most gas stations lowered their prices at 9 in the morning and raised them at 4. Something about fucking over people who had already driven to work and drivers who didn't leave their cubicles until dusk. We then find that our main character, Finley K, is on a mission to see if this is true. So he is circling around his town, waiting to see if the gas prices drop after 9 a.m. in the morning. We learn a lot about Finley in this first section. We learn that he is pretty smart and pretty open-minded. We learn that he has an interesting job. We come to understand that Roger from Roger's Dodgers, he seems to like. We really get an inside look at who he is and what it is that he is interested in. And in this moment, his interests lie in learning about whether or not what he's heard on the news is correct. Now, what's interesting about this is that the gas prices only dropped 2 cents, and yet Finley is, really interested in that deal. Later on in the story, we'll see when he's ran out some of the gas, and then later on when he thinks some of the gas has been siphoned off, that he really, wanted that deal. He wanted to save those 2 cents per gallon. But some of this is also setting us up for just the disarray that is Finley K's life. In this first section of the story, as he's driving around, I want to bring your attention to the third paragraph in the story. It says, 365, 365, 365, 365. I rounded the block. This is the Columbia Road, over to the old Callistown Road, onto the Charleston Road, onto old Callistown Road, particular circle. What I'm saying is I circled the heart of town where supply and demand mattered. In between, I noticed 6 or 8 church signs, the funeral home, Southern Exotic Pets, Worms Bar, and so on. So in this first section of this paragraph, a couple of things interesting are happening. First of all, we see him literally driving around in circles, which is symbolic, likely, of his life. He's kind of stuck in a pattern. He's stuck going around in circles based on the events of what's happened in the recent past for him. Additionally, we learn a little bit about the town Callistown. Callistown's a really interesting name because it has the word callous in it, which suggests some hardening, some unpleasantness, something that's not quite attractive. And then we kind of hear what's in this church, and we get the idea that this is a very typical small southern town. So we have 6 or 8 church signs, so that's lots of churches, a funeral home, Southern Exotic Pet, so we've got that ring to the south. We have the local bar. So he's going around talking about the things that are in this town. Pretty typical town. The addition of the many churches really rings true to it being a southern town. And then we get him talking about Worm, owner of Worm's Bar. He says Worm had a new piece of plywood laying next to his door that advertised topless, which meant he'd be in there behind the bar not wearing a shirt. He had done it before, during lean times, like the last time gasoline prices reached $3.65, and people rarely left their houses. One of the churches had a magnetic letter sign out front that read, "Sin cooks fry later," which took me about 16 right-hand turns to figure out what's with cooks being both a verb and noun, and wondering if someone forgot a comma. I thought at least the preacher or signage person isn't making me go to the library 40 miles away, find a Bible, and look up what's spelled out in a particular chapter and verse. So, first and foremost, we get an introduction to who Worm is, and Worm will be mentioned later on in the story, and we know that he's the local bartender. He owns a bar. And we have this little humorous moment where Worm is advertising that his bar is going to be topless, and it's he who is going to be topless, which is kind of amusing. It's a turn on the idea of other types of topless bars, right? Then we see a church sign, "Sin cooks fry later," and we see that Finley K is trying to figure this out, and he says, and this is really more interesting than anything else about this, is that he would have to drive 40 miles away to find a Bible and look up what's spelled out in a particular church chapter or verse. If the Sin Cooks Fry later sign had maybe referenced a verse in the library or was very much in the word of the Bible. So this gives us some insight into Finley K's person. We understand that he's probably not your typical Southern Christian man because he would have to go to the library many, many miles away to find a Bible. This is important. Also, keep in mind that the library is 40 miles away, which kind of speaks probably to the education level of the people in this town. So it kind of helps us understand just how small this town is. As the story goes on, we learn that at 9 o'clock, in fact, the cost of gasoline does go down. And then ultimately we learn that Finley decides to go in Roger Dodgers. And he tells us it's because he likes to hear the Indian guy in there yell things out to his wife in whatever dialect they employed. It didn't matter to me much that they offered gas that came from one of the major oil companies or that they charged an extra dime per gallon if one used a credit card, just like every other station on the block. So we see here in this moment that it's a very interesting dichotomy because he wants to go in and he wants to go to this particular store because it's owned by an Indian husband and wife, and he kind of likes the spectacle of that, but then he's also open-minded to them. So it's a really interesting juxtaposition here where we see him being, him both kind of stereotyping this couple, but at the same time being open-minded to them in a way that it appears that a lot of the town people are not. So this, again, really kind of provides some insight into his character. So then, as he's at the gas station, he has to go in, and that's when we meet our other lead character. So this is what it says. This is when I noticed a white man of the normal indeterminate age of these parts, which means between 50 and 80, sitting in front of a 55-gallon plastic barrel, his legs splayed out with 10 or 12 pints of blackberries in between. He said, "You need some berries, Chief? Keep away the cancer. Eat them on ice cream or whole under milk or by themselves. Keep away the cancer. You don't want the cancer for you and yours, right?" So here we're going to meet Reuben Orr. We don't quite know that this is him yet, but it is, as you later find out as you're reading the story. And there's a couple of things going on here. First of all, he's selling something and he's wanting to sell it to Finley K. In addition to that, we can kind of look at this description of him and understand who he is. Finley K tells us that this character is between the ages, an indeterminate age of between 50 and 80. This is again kind of playing on to what you expect your typical Southern man to have looked like, probably particularly in a small town. So probably someone who has worked outside, who has had a lot of sun exposure, perhaps smokes. There's kind of this generalized look perhaps that he's alluding to. And then we get this moment where we also have the opportunity to look at Reuben's speech. He says, eat them on ice cream or whole under milk or by themselves. Keep away the cancer. His speech is not particularly fluid. Some of the syntax is not what we would consider standard American English. And that's not what we're getting from Finley K, which then helps us set Finley K a little bit further apart. He's clearly an outsider in this town in some regard, and we will learn more and more about that as this goes on. But this is a place where we can see this, because Finley K, while I'm not going to make a claim for being the most educated man, he tells us that he dropped out of college in his junior year. He looks at the world differently. He is learned in some regard. He's well read. We'll point out some places where that's the case later on in the story, and that's not what we're seeing here of Reuben Orr. Okay, so we see Finley go into the store. He talks to Roger. He and Roger have a very similar conversation that they always do. He mentions that Roger always mentions about... Well, what he says is, "I would like to say that the price of fuel caused people in my town to act all bold up and cocksure. But even if Roger inside decided to sell his gasoline at pre-1979 prices and hand out wedges of free garlic naan, everyone would still pick fights and scowl. And so this gives us a little bit of insight in both to how the town operates in general. It's a place where people pick fights and scowl. And it's a place where even if Roger's lowering his prices and giving things away, people still probably aren't going to want to come to his store. And it's likely, the illusion here is that it's likely due to his immigration status, the fact that he is not, quote, American, that he has a family, his family came from India. So then we continue on. We learn that Roger and Finley have slowly become better and better acquainted. And we learn this through the way that Roger responds to Finley, going from Mr. K to Mr. Finley K to Mr. Finley. It seems that Finley's hopeful that eventually he'll just be Finley. But they've not quite made it there yet. We also hear them talk about the gas prices, and Roger says, "Don't blame me for the gas prices. I make 2 cents for every gallon. 2 cents. Everyone thinks that we are setting the high prices, but it's the oil companies and the Arabs. Mr. Finley, please, as you go about your daily duties, tell people that I am not from Arabia." So it's interesting here because we have Roger, who is Indian, who is being probably prejudiced against, and he's being lumped in with people from Arabic nations, even though he's not. And this is really indicative of how this town and many people in the South, or even in America in general, their outlook on people from Arabic nations, and the fact that Roger does not want to be associated with this shows even another layer to this, a pulling back of the onion of, if you will, those layers, all those different layers that comes with this level of prejudice. Okay, so he goes in, he does what he needs to do. He pays for his gas. We see that he and Roger have a very comfortable relationship, he and Raj, but Raj tells him he's his favorite customer. However, he tells everybody that, and we see Finley kind of scoffing at this a little bit, although he doesn't call him out on it. Once it comes back out, the Blackberry guy, Reuben Orr, is still going to be there. And he says, "I can get y'all a deal on telephone poles. Who needs some beet sugar? I can get y'all sugar, beans, gourd birdhouses, snow peas, book machetes, and rebuilt carburetors. Y'all need any of those things? I got a line on Royal brand typewriters. I got fescue, putters, fog lights, boogie boards, aluminum siding, fire ant killer, and plastic lifelike nativity scenes. Did I mention telephone poles and blackberries?" We see Finley really kind of in awe of Reuben Orr's list of things that he has, not really knowing what to make of it. And so he's like, "Nope, just need gas. Don't need any of this." And he's trying to move on about his business. I do want to bring your attention to how George Singleton is using listing in this story. We get a list of everything that Reuben Orr has with him. Earlier in the story, when he's driving around the town, we get lists of the roads he's on, lists of the things he sees. And all of this is working in two ways. A, it is characterizing the town, characterizing the characters, but it's also kind of providing this sense of confusion. In this most recent spot where Reuben Orr is telling us all the things he has, it's overwhelming, and it kind of works to muddle the reader a little bit, to confuse the reader a little bit, okay? And it's meant to clearly confuse Finley K as well. It's here that we learn Reuben's name. Raj says, "Hello, Mr. Reuben Orr," so now we know who it is. And then we see Finley becoming curious. He says, "You got any ukuleles?" I asked him. If he did, then I knew he had stolen them from me. And this is the place where we understand that Finley is suspicious of those around him, and that he immediately kind of comes to this place of, oh, well, he must be, stealing from me if he has these. And we also learn here, I had gone from being a normal luthier into specializing in ukuleles, an instrument that had become more sought after than most people believe, probably because of ADD. It's at this place that we understand that, or we come to know, that Finley K has an odd job for a man in a small southern town. He makes ukuleles, which, as he mentions, is a strange instrument. He likens it to, or points to, his success due to ADD, which is a really interesting thing to point to. And it kind of is a sign of the times. ADD is, this epidemic these days with kids having ADD. And, well, if they learn an instrument, maybe that'll help them. So this starts to set up where we're going to go from here. And that's going to bring us to section 2 of the story. And in section 2 of the story, we're going to see Reuben Orr pursue Finley and how Finley reacts to that. So as he is driving back home, he sees that he is being followed. So it says, so it wasn't difficult to see in my rearview mirror Mr. Reuben Orr telling me on his moped. 6'4", 6'6" on a moped is what I'm saying. I took some turns. There weren't many options. Onto Old Savannah Road, Old Charlotte Road, then Old Myrtle Beach. And the guy stayed behind me. I thought, fuck, do I want to waste all this cheap 2-penny off normal price gas trying to keep a BlackBerry to telephone pole selling moped riding lunatic from perhaps following me back home? Maybe he actually lived on the route I'm taking, I thought. Okay, so here we see that he's being pursued by Reuben, and that this is unsettling for Finley. He doesn't like that he's following him, but he's kind of trying to rationalize it. I do want to bring your attention to some of the humor in this piece, in this last sentence. The way he characterizes Reuben Orr is amusing. Some of our inner thoughts that we're getting, this is a first-person narrative, so we have Finley K telling Finley K's story. Basically, as it's going about, although this is a retrospect story, we see things in a chronological order as to how they happen. Because of that, we get some insight into his mind, and the way he looks at things can often be amusing. This is an example of it. So here we notice that he's spent a good eighth of his tank of gas. He wasn't real pleased about that. And then we learn something particularly interesting. And this is where we start to understand some of what's going on with Finley K. And then we get to start questioning, well, why is it what it is? So it says, I got to the road where I lived, where my ex-wife and I lived until she said out loud that she didn't believe in a ukulele making husband and took off for Raleigh, North Carolina, where evidently men have jobs that are more secure and less suspect. So we find out that Finley's wife has left him. And from this point, we begin to understand more and more that Finley K is not simply an outsider based on his profession and things of that nature, but that he's not moved on from the failure of this marriage, that he's struggling with it. It will be mentioned many additional times as we go through this story. So then, as he keeps seeing that Reuben is behind him, he then starts trying to come up with a plan, perhaps, of how he's going to deal with this. So this is what he says. I don't know that this has much to do with my story, but I don't believe in the NRA. I mean, I believe the NRA exists, just like I believe the Bible exists, for I've seen it, but I don't believe in those virgin births, parting of the Red Sea, burning bush, dead guys Lazarus returning, water to wine kinds of stories. Anyway, I don't believe the Second Amendment allows us to carry little pistols around whenever we want for the only purpose of shooting people we fear. No, I believe in taking care of things otherwise. Here is another place where we're seeing Finley pushing back against Southern stereotypes. He doesn't believe in God as presented in the Bible. He doesn't believe in the NRA. He doesn't read the Second Amendment as many people do, particularly in the South. And so we see him again seeing how he is this outsider in this particular town and how he's different than what we expect. But we do understand that he's looking for a reason to take care of business. So he says, I got out of my truck, reached beneath the seat, and pulled out half a Louisville Slugger. I pulled out nunchucks I didn't even know how to use. Further back, I found an old length of a telephone line, maybe 18 inches in length, notch marks on either end for better grip. In my pocket, I knew there was a razor-sharp folding buck knife, but that would be my last option. So we find out that he has all of these tools to defend himself. He's ready to fight, which is really strange because he doesn't seem like much of a fighter. Yet he is prepared in case someone comes to attack him, which is particularly interesting. It shows us that he's living in some form of fear, even if he's not carrying around a gun. So Ruben's going to come up to his car and he's going to say, or his truck, and say, and Finley's going to say, "Why are you following me?" Here's what we get. He set his kickstand and turned the ignition. "You never let me finish my sentence. I thought you'd be coming back in the station. Anyway, sure enough, I do have a couple of ukuleles back at the trailer. Well, back in one of the filled up trailers, I got to the side of my double wide. I got kerosene lanterns, pup tents, crockery, model cars, and airplanes in the box, alligator heads and stuffed bobcat, all kinds of shit, and 2 ukuleles, but I imagine the cat gut somewhere between compromised and useless." This was the place where, when I was reading this, I thought, this Ruben Orr guy is a little bit crazy. I mean, I kind of thought maybe with all the stuff he had that he was definitely a hoarder. Now we find that he has all of this stuff. He's trying to sell this stuff in exchange for money, obviously. But he's just, there's just an alligator head, stuffed bobcats. It's like, this is probably not our most savory character. Then as we go on down, we see that this is going to entice Finley. He wants to see these ukuleles to see if they are his. Remember, early on, he said that if Ruben had ukuleles, he had probably stolen them from him. So he's wanting to see. He's going to want to investigate. And this is going to do just what Ruben Orr is hoping it does, which is to get Finley K to him. Again, Ruben Orr is pursuing Finley, and this is going to do the trick. And so Ruben Orr said, "I tell you what, Finley, do you mind if I call you Finley or Finn? Raj told me your name. I tell you what, I'll go home, get the ukuleles, and bring them back over to Roger Dodgers." So here we see him call Finley by name. He says Raj is the one who told him the name. We find out later that this is not true, that this is part of this ploy to get him there. So it then turns out that Ruben is out of gas. But before we get there, we see that Ruben notices Finley's house and he comments on how it was a nice setup. And Finley says, "Used to have a rich wife and a regular job." And Ruben says, "I hear that, except for I've never had a regular job or a rich wife." And this is important because it shows us that there's this disconnect between these two men. That it's not simply their interest in ukuleles versus, all this random junk. But Ruben Orr is making a point of saying, yeah, my life doesn't look like that. But he's doing it kind of in a covert way. And that's an important thing to note. However, in the next little bit of a paragraph, we learn something that is interesting. And, again, this is after we learn that Ruben is out of gas, and he says, "God damn it, this wouldn't have happened if you had pulled over when I kept buzzing my horn and flashing my lights. Man, I took off following you before I could even fill up at Rogers. They all drop their prices from 9 in the morning until when people get off work. I seen a thing on it about the news." And this is this place where we understand, well, maybe there is something in common with these two men. From there, we said, "I had 0 cans of gas in my possession, seeing as I feared my ex-father-in-law showing up, spreading it around, and burning me clear out of the state." Okay, so here, this is an important detail. We come back to this failed marriage yet again. This is the 3rd or 4th time it's been mentioned at this point. And now we learn that the father-in-law has some form of grudge against Finley, which makes us wonder why. He says, "Or my own dousing the place and sitting in the middle of it all, surrounded by custom-made ukuleles that weren't selling like a year earlier." And here we get even more information here. We understand that Finley is probably depressed, which is indicated by his own fantasy of dousing the place and sitting in the middle of it all, dousing it with gas. Now, he doesn't have any gas, but if he did, that would be something that would tempt him. So that's an important piece for us to know it. So Ruben's going to get into Finley's vehicle, and when he does that, he clearly notices all of these weapons that Finley pulled out earlier, and ask him about it. And then we learn something else about Finley that provides greater insight into his character. He says, I couldn't lie. It's a fault. Not being able to lie ruined my marriage. Making and selling ukuleles doesn't require lying since they are what they are. I dropped out of college first semester junior year because I enrolled in an acting class, and as it ended up, I couldn't conjure up a dialect outside of the one I owned or memorize lines I'd never said in a social situation. So here we see that he's not good at pretending, and his inability to pretend means that he's an easy read. But it also means it could perhaps get him into trouble, or maybe it makes him a better person. We don't know just yet. So the two men are going to get into the car, and they're going to head. Roger says, well, Ruben says, well, instead of going back to the gas station, I don't live far from there. I have gas at my house. Why don't we just go into my home? And our last thought that we get from Finley in this section is, I thought a fireplace poker would fit nicely beneath my truck seat. I thought, find a way to ask if he's got fireplace pokers for sale when we get there. So he's still kind of thinking about these weapons, the ability to defend himself. And it's in this place that we understand that, Ruben has managed to get Finley to come to his house, which is important. But in addition to that Finley is still afraid. He's thinking about what another weapon, another way that he can protect himself. So then we're going to move into part 3 of the story, and this is our place where we're going to eventually get to our climax of the story as we arrive at Ruben's home. And when we get to Ruben's home, we're going to hear that he has his trailer, and it's surrounded by 4 single wides, 2 Airstreams, and 2 yellow school buses plugged without wheels into a clay yard. This is very much in line with the stereotypical Southern hoarder, white trash kind of person. And we see that Finley is picking up on this. He says, when viewed from above, I would imagine that his arrangement of aluminum abodes looks similar to ancient hieroglyphics or one of Carl Gustav Jung's mandala examples, or a cartoon character slit eyeball with crow feet. Over the years, I think I had a couple of oak wood ukuleles. One time, I had one built out of balsa wood, but I had it outside on a windy day and never seen the thing again. So we see that they're here looking for the ukuleles. We also get another insight into Finley being at least learned. We know he didn't complete college, but he does talk about Carl Jung. He talks about hieroglyphics. We even have him thinking about cartoon characters' eyeballs. All of this kind of shows to the vast array of things that he has taken interest in at some point or another in his life. So at this point, they're going to start looking for the ukuleles, and Finley is going to have a look around and really be taken in by this place. So here's what Finley says. I can't lie. Like I said, I think you brought me here on a ruse. I think that my ex-father-in-law hired you out to kill me. So here we're going to see Finley really showing his paranoia. He thinks that he's been trapped here, and perhaps, he has been, but maybe it's not for the reasons he thinks, which we'll find a little bit later on. But here's what we learn. He smiled. Ruben smiled. Man, you got some kind of paranoia going on for you, son. Look, I will confess a thing or two, Finley K. First off, I know who you are. 2, I'm about broke. I just thought that if I could get you over here, you'd be the kind of fellow who would appreciate my collections and possibly want to buy something. Everybody knows how much money you're getting for custom-made Finley K 2-stone soprano ukuleles, plus that monetary award you got from the Arts Commission for Craftsperson of the Year, beating out all the basket weavers down in the Low Country. That's it, I promise. So here we learn that Ruben has done his research on Finley. Ruben knows who Finley is, even knows that he's won Craftsperson of the Year. We understand that Finley makes good money based on his ukuleles that he makes should he sell them. We know he has gotten prize money from being Craftsperson of the Year. We know that he has an ex-wife who was of means. So there's an interest here that Reuben has in Finley because he thinks that Finley might possibly be somebody who would want to buy something for him. And this is the place where we get a little bit of a clue, or maybe we should be questioning, well, why would, even if Finley does have money available to him, why would he be the kind of person who would want to buy something from Roger? We do hear from Finley that he basically believes him, that this makes sense, that, maybe he's not, up to anything particularly bad. And then we're going to see Finley start looking around. And while he's doing that, we're going to have Reuben make a drink. So as Finley is walking around, it says, fuck, I thought, who drinks old fashioned these days outside of 90-year-old Kentucky women, 26-year-old hipsters nostalgic for brow cream, money clips, cufflinks, Vitalis, manual typewriters, turntables, cat eye eyeglasses, and vintage paneled station wagons. I thought my wife somehow got a hold of Reuben and told him how I never understood the notion of moderation except in matters of love and the mother of pearl inlay. So here we see that a couple of things. First of all, he's calling into question this idea of Reuben making an old fashioned for them. We also get his description of what a hipster is like. And then we come back to his wife. He thinks his wife has gotten a hold of Reuben, and he says that he's never understood moderation except in matters of love and mother of pearl. This matters of love is the important part. If he was moderate in his matters of love, then it suggests that maybe he wasn't as loving of a husband as his wife had hoped for or had expected, and that had perhaps went on to destroy their marriage. It could have been the underpinning of that. So it continues on. He's looking through these places. I hope you don't have any raccoons holed up in here, I said, but Reuben had already entered his abode. I said to myself, go in, pick out a couple of things, pay for them, and get the hell out of here. I walked up 3 concrete steps to what had once been a classic all-silver and aqua single wide, probably one of the remaining few manufactured circa 1960 that hadn't uprooted and flown away via tornadoes. I thought, pick 2 things, pay what he asks, go home, and call somebody to install a home security system. Call up Rachel and tell her I'm not planning any surprise trips to Riley's should she worry, unless a knot of ukulele troubadours requests some specialized instrument worthy of viable amplification. We see here that Finley is legitimately afraid. He wants to get out of this place as quickly as he can. He is paranoid, and he basically resolves, I'm gonna buy some things, and I'm gonna call my ex-wife, tell her I'm not going to be coming up there. I mean, he says that he's not planning any surprise trips, which suggests that he maybe had surprised her before with a trip to Raleigh to see her, but that basically he'll leave her alone, just please call this guy off. In the next paragraph, we see that he's looking to make sure there wasn't a visible bomb strapped to the undercarriage of his truck, as though his truck was going to blow up. We find out that inside of the trailer that he's going to go into, that there are stuffed bobcats, coyotes, wild turkeys, hawks, owls, coons, skunks, a river otter, maybe a badger, groundhog, 1 small pony, a nutria, foxes, 2 armadillos, and a cold venomous rattler that roam the floor. So he then says it's a 16 by 80 foot trailer. This is a huge trailer, and it has all of these taxidermied animals in it. He mentions mounted heads of deer, wild boar, 1 moose, and 2-headed calf adorn the upper parts of the walls. But he doesn't see any sort of a ukulele. So he's giving us a picture of just how packed this thing is and what it's packed with. So he says, yep, no ukulele is going to go to the next one. He goes to an Airstream. And he's looking through plastic bins that basically have trash in them. Bottle caps, rocks, peach pits. Again, this is painting a picture that is going to keep adding into, like, why am I here? I haven't found anything. And Reuben Orr is going to come out and say, you haven't found anything else? It says, I jumped away in a way that didn't make me proud. I might have blurted out, not now, or this isn't how I'm supposed to die. Like that. I said, man, I've never seen anything like this. Do you have a website? You need to have some of your stuff listed on eBay or Craigslist or something like that. Reuben Orr handed me a delicate glass with a slice of orange hanging on top. He said, what? He held out his glass to clink. Now, This isn't your run-of-the-mill old-fashioned. I waited for him to drink first, of course. I even thought to ask that we switch glasses, seeing as mine might be poison, but then I remembered a psychology course I took one time. Evidently, people can smell paranoia, and they hold poison drinks in their own hands knowing they'll be requested to switch, etc. So here we see again his education of psychology, and we also see him even admitting he's paranoid. Like he knows he's paranoid here. It goes on. My own ex-wife said that I let off distinguishable pheromones right before I admitted how I never wished to move out of Callistown, work a regular job, have children, vote Republican, join a gym that offered spin classes, and promise that we'd one day own a timeshare in Myrtle Beach. That vote Republican part seemed to be what ended our marriage. Listen, I could have gone in the booth, come out, and lied, but it didn't occur to me until she had already settled down doing whatever she found necessary. So here, we see where some of the conflict in his relationship was, and part of it is simply that he is not the typical Southern man. He doesn't want to vote Republican. He doesn't want some of the more highfalutin things that Southerners or people in general enjoy, spin classes. He doesn't want to have a regular class. He doesn't want to have children. He doesn't want to have a basic timeshare in Myrtle Beach. None of that's of interest to him. And most importantly, he doesn't want to leave Callistown. He wants to stay there. Clearly he has. Rachel, his wife, did not. So they start to drink, and Finley is taken aback by the drink. And so he wants to know what's in it. Reuben says, I normally don't tell people my secrets. Hell, I've had Worm down at Worm's place offer me $33 for this recipe, but I wouldn't give it to him. I might have to in time with my financial state, but not so far. Here we have Worm being brought up again. Clearly, Worm is known by everyone. And we also learned that this is a good recipe for this drink because Finley's interested in it and Worm wants to buy the recipe. So then we have Finley ask, well, how come you and I have never run into each other? Callistown ain't exactly a metropolis. How long have you lived here? I've been here my whole life except for a couple of years. The ukuleles ain't in this bus. I know. Let's go on to the next one, Reuben said. He said, hold on right here, and ran back to his trailer, opened the door, reached in, and retrieved an entire picture of his old fashions. Here you go, he said, on return, filling my glass. He pulled out orange slices from the picture and floated it atop my drink. I said, I might be interested in a finial or two. I don't have a staircase in my house, but I have a thing for finials. Maybe I can make a ukulele with a finial at next end. Most people insist on a couple of dashes per bitters per glass. Me, I use muddled unripe raspberries. Most people insist on maraschino cherries. I use a blackberry. See, I muddle blackberries, a lemon rind, and a cube of brown sugar, the unripe raspberries, and I use rye whiskey instead of regular bourbon. I use a half and half mix of spring water and club soda, and then I put a taste of good moonshine in there. It's not more than a thimbleful per glass, That's all I can tell you. The other two are secret ingredients I won't tell. So it's interesting, this conversation they're having, because we have Finley asking questions, and then Reuben is talking back to him, but he's not answering the question. So Finley says, what's in the drink? He doesn't immediately tell him. Then he says, well, how long have you been here? And then Reuben says, well, let's go look in this place. And then Finley asks about the finials, and then he gets the recipe for the drink. Notice that the drink's important. He says that he muddles all of these things together. He's mashing them all together. He's combining these things. That's a form of muddling with a drink, but also one becomes muddled when you put too many things together, as we're seeing in this story. So Finley tells us, I finished my second glass. Reuben and I passed the fourth outbuilding, and then 5 through 8. We went by number 1 again and kept circling. I kind of forgot that we meant to find a vintage string instrument formed of pure mahogany. This is indicative of that, again, being in a pattern, being stuck, being circular in things that are happening, and this idea that things are becoming muddled even more so for Finley K. He's becoming kind of confused, not even remembering what he was here for. We've seen each other, Reuben said. I guess you weren't paying attention. He and I rounded his place another half-dozen times, high-stepping over broken glass, weeds, pottery shards, old vaccination tags, deteriorating tennis balls, broken bottles, doll limbs, and so on and so forth. And then we hear him say, as a matter of fact, I rationalized a premier ukulele maker might want to drink nothing but cocktails that required an intense, precise, and specific muddling process, garnished with paper umbrellas. I said, I'm not the first person to say I'm self-absorbed. I'm the second. Rachel used to say it all the time. I think that's what she kept saying. Maybe I wasn't paying attention to her either. So again, we're coming back to this idea of Rachel and what went wrong in their marriage and how he's trying to come to terms with it. He's really kind of struggling with what happened. And then we find out that Reuben knew Rachel. He says, I knew Rachel. She bought some Fire King from me. As a matter of fact, I believe Rachel met my daughter one time. My one daughter. I believe you met her one time too, son. At least one time. And here's our real turning point in the story where we're going to understand what this is all about. Is going to be our climax here. It says, I picked up all of the repetitive stories. It didn't take a master's degree in psychology to understand that he wanted to make some kind of point. I looked into Reuben Orr's face and sure enough recognized the resemblance in his eyes of a woman named May Lee. I had once known, I thought, the one local ukulele lesson needy woman who required private lessons that I'd ever fallen for, and, in my inability to lie, told Rachel. It's here that we understand that it wasn't just he was self-absorbed. All of these character traits that he's told us about that were problematic were there, but he's also had an affair, and that's probably a lot of what led to his divorce from Rachel. I met a woman I'm attracted to, etc. She wasn't even local officially, just someone taking care of a sick relative for the summer months, as I recalled. May Lee had signed up for the ukulele class over at the Callistown Community Center, where I'd taught a 6-class course. To Reuben, I said, May Lee Orr's your daughter? I guessed at the last name. Our affair didn't last long enough for us to know family names. Well, I guess she knew mine, seeing as she strummed a Finley K ukulele. So, what do you think about buying a little something I got taxidermy now? Maylee's little boy ain't interested in animals at the time, but I bet he will be one day. So here we again are really getting kind of hitting the stomach with everything that is happening here. We kind of feel this as it is settling into Finley K. We learn that he's had this affair with Reuben's daughter. We learn that Rachel knew about it. He told Rachel about it, and we can assume that that's probably what led to the end of their marriage. And then we learn that May Lee has a little boy, and he says, and Reuben says, what do you think about buying a little something I got taxidermied now? See, this answers that question we had earlier about why is Finley K the kind of guy who would be willing to buy something from Reuben, and now we know why. Because May Lee's little boy ain't interested in animals at the time, but I bet he will be one day. We understand that May Lee has a son, and the what's being suggested here is that Finley is the father. So now we're going to move into section 4. We've gotten the revelation that came with the end of part 3. We've had our climax. So now we're going to end it all out. We're going to learn how all of this came to pass and what's going to, maybe happen next. He says, I read somewhere along the way that owning a pickup truck between the ages of 22 and 30 created a number of inescapable furniture handling weekends for friends and strangers alike. And that ownership past the age of 30 brought about requests from friends and strangers to borrow the truck in order to haul firewood, mulch, and potting soil. Whoever came up with this little truism needs to update his or her adage to include a menagerie of rabies-worthy stuffed animals. Well, not quite true. I felt obliged to buy every available bobcat, fox, raccoon, and beaver that Reuben Orr needed to evict from his storage unit. So here we see that Finley has gotten the message about May Lee, about the fact that May Lee has a child, and that he's like, okay, I'm going to give some money to this. I'm going to make this work. He says, I'm going to Reuben says, I'm going to use this money to start my grandboy up a college fund so he can be like you, Reuben said, as I tried to drive off. He said, you know what his name is? I didn't say no, for I felt pretty certain it was Finley. I stared at Reuben Orr. He said, that's right, you know. So this is that place where clearly we learned in the last section that this was all calculated. But all of this was really calculated. Reuben Orr had set out to find Finley K, bring Finley K to him, get Finley K to give him some money that would go to Finley K's son, and to break the news to him that Finley K had a son with his daughter. So all of this, again, was very calculated. This also gives us kind of a timetable, because if Mei Lee has the son already, that means that since their affair, there's at least been 9 months time to have the baby, and we don't know the age of the baby just yet. We don't know if he's just been born or if it's been a while, but that gives us kind of a timetable for how long it's been since things went really sideways with Finley's wife as well. He says, I said, I'll get you the rest of the money when I can, for even though he offered me a deal, we went inside and looked at his Mac at various mid-sized animals for sale on eBay, Craigslist, and some kind of mountain and lake cabin interior decorator site. We wanted to make sure that neither of us over or underpriced the value of a beaver. So he's saying, I'm going to bring you more money. We're going to do more. He's clearly trying to come up with some way to fill his obligation here. And then Finley's going to leave. And so he says, I began driving home, careful not to veer across lines that weren't even painted on back roads, my eyes in the rearview mirror. I didn't want my animals to topple roadside, for one, and I feared that Reuben Orr might follow me. What would I do if, as I pulled into my own driveway, he puttered up to tell me how his grandson kept asking who his father was? Would I reach beneath my seat and pull out one of my so-called weapons? Would I cry? What kind of explanation could I summon up, honestly? Should he bring along a lawyer, social worker, or Mei Lee, or herself? This is interesting because he's saying that the grandson he's suggesting that the grandson could ask about his father, which means that the child is probably older than a baby, but we don't know that for sure, but that seems to make sense. He's going to notice that his fuel was probably siphoned off, so he goes back to Rogers to get more gas. And this is what it says. Roger changed the price back up to $3.65 as I coasted into his convenience store. I looked at my wristwatch to read that, just like the smart man on TV pointed out, it would be between 4 and 5 in the afternoon. I looked over to check on Reuben's blackberry cartons, which seemed to be undisturbed. Roger yelled out, Hello, Mr. Finley. Good to see you again. Are you going to construct a humorous diorama so that those weasels hold your special ukuleles? Very good. Very funny. When animals look like they possess musical abilities, I've seen many animals playing music on the internet. Always good. Bullfrog with banjo. I said nothing to Roger for 2 reasons. Later on, I would fret endlessly that he considered it a snub. I didn't respond to him because I pictured all those stuffed animals actually holding ukuleles for some kind of promotional advertising, maybe in the back of Taxidermy Today or Yuki and Yours. Secondly, beyond the sparse afternoon Callistown traffic, I detected the faint sputtering. At first, not unlike a brave gnat entering the ear canal that turned to distant chainsaw, then unmistakable poor cousin of Honda 150 or Yamaha 175 or Japanese electric turkey knife. I said, I know the trick y'all are playing on people, Raj. The new news can do some kind of survey saying gas prices are low, but then y'all jack it up crazy when most people need to fill up. Reuben Orr neared. So here we see Roger welcoming him back. He's finding the humor in all of these animals. He's given him an idea, and we see that Finley can't even respond, and it's because he realizes that Reuben is coming back to the gas station right where he is. So it says, Reuben Orr neared. I imagined him riding that moped with sawed-off shotgun swathed around his back. Again, we see this paranoia. And then we're going to really get into why Reuben has come back. It's not just to get his blackberries. He said, Reuben stops. He cleared his throat hard twice, straddled the moped, cleared his throat again, bent over and banged his right knee with his right palm, straightened up, walked 2 steps to my truck bed and pet the bobcat. He said, I can't leave you, Robert. I'm sorry. This is the place where I thought, man, he really is nuts. He's talking to these taxidermied animals. But there's going to be reason for this. As we know, Finley suspected Roger of siphoning his gas. He says, "You stole gas from me." "Hello, Mr. Reuben Orr," Raj says. "I made a mistake," Reuben said. He touched every stuffed animal and called their names. Ringo for the raccoon, for example, and Slappy for the beaver. "Oh, God, I've made some mistake." He looked like he might cry. "This would be a good time for you to say how you, too, have made some mistakes in your life, both personal and professional." He didn't look 6'4", 6'6" anymore. As a matter of fact, he looked like the kind of man who could be a good grandfather to a ukulele-making man's bastard child. I said, "I have sure enough made some errors." I said, "I know this won't make anyone involved feel better, but my own father thinks I'm screwed up too." So we get a lot here. First, we have Reuben very upset about selling his animals. And he says he's made mistakes. And he says, "And you know what, Finley? You too have made mistakes. This would be a good time for you to admit to that." And Finley, following suit, does. He says, "Yep, I have," and even goes as far to say, "My dad even thinks, I'm terrible. That I'm really screwed up." So then we're going to have something else I want to pull out before we move on is the fact that Finley is going to say that it looks like Reuben could be a good grandfather, and that's going to soften him a little bit. Raj went inside. I looked at what I carried in the back of my truck. Reuben Orr said he didn't want to go through with our original plan and gave me back the cash I'd handed over for starters. "These are like children to me. You can't just sell off or abandon children, right?" I got it. I understood Maylee's father's less than subtle allusion. I said, "I might want to rent out some of the animals in the future. I could use them for promotion, We can talk about it after the blood test." So we are at this place where we get to the point. Reuben's going to say, "I can't sell off my babies. And you know what? You shouldn't either. You shouldn't be willing to give me this money and just abandon your child." That's really the point he's making. And Finley gets this and he says, "Hey, you know what? Maybe we can work out renting some of these after the blood test," which says, "Look, yep, I'm with you. I've got it. I've got your point, but I need proof." And, he's going to seek that. Eventually they're going to part, and Reuben is going to say, "We should all get together sometime, before and after, no matter the results," which is a really interesting line because it suggests to us that Reuben sees Finley as being an all right person because he wants to get together with him, whether the child ends up his or not. It doesn't seem that there's an ill will there necessarily. He wants to take care of his grandson, but if the grandson's not his, he seems to have made some sort of connection with Finley, whether, Finley is with that or not. Here's what Finley says. "I believed him and put the nozzle in my tank. I looked in the store to see Raj giving me the go-ahead to pump. I pulled the trigger and thought about what I rightly owed a lot of people. What a bad person I ended up, truly, I thought. I needed to call Maylee, my ex-wife, and anyone I had deceived into thinking he or she could achieve peace when strumming 4 strings on a miniature instrument." So here we get this reflection, this element of depression where Finley's really down on himself. He's recognizing, just how wrong he's gone and how off things were for him because of the decisions he's made. His affair with Maylee, the way he treated his ex-wife, the fact that he had an affair. He says even deceiving anyone into thinking that they could find peace by learning to play his instrument that he makes. He's really down on himself. And this all comes as a result of showing just how everything has come together, how it's all gotten muddled up, and it has muddled things for Finley K. Overall, this story does a good job of having our first-person narrator try to provide an honest portrayal as he sees it. He's a more reliable first-person narrator than some first-person narrators. He seems to be telling us the truth, although he slowly gets to the point. We see that he is really trying to grapple with all of the guilt that he has and all of the desire he has maybe to have made things right in his marriage, or maybe not. We're not 100% sure, but he's clearly being haunted by the fact that his marriage ended, and he's floundering a bit to find purpose again. And as this is taking place, he also learns that he has a son, which makes things even more confusing for him and really makes him question everything that's there for him. All right, that's all I've got for you. If you have questions or concerns once you watch this video, once you've made it to this point, 54 minutes in, please feel free to let me know.